Well, here we are. What a day for Michigan State. Sometimes, it really felt like it would never come, but Mark Dantonio is gone. He has retired after 13 years in East Lansing. It has been, mostly an incredible run. We'll talk about it a little bit. Not the best day in East Lansing for a number of reasons, but let's get started with the big story of the day. Mark Dantonio is gone 13 years later. A complicated legacy that became more and more complicated as it unfurled. So let's start with today's news again. Mark Dantonio is gone, and really we have to look at this in the big picture. Is this really surprising that Mark Dantonio is gone? No, it's not. It is not surprising that Mark Dantonio retired. It is surprising that he decided to retire on February 4th, the day before signing day, 2 months after he initially said he would be back. That part is surprising. So I thought I was a fool because I was spending all of October and November, you can check the Twitter feed, saying that Dantonio was clearly going to retire. He had the body language of a corpse, and a rather stiff corpse. He looked like he didn't want to be there. He looked like the most miserable human being alive. Mark Dantonio was done. And his face told the story. And I was convinced. I talked about it on this show. I talked about it amongst my friends, my thousands of followers on Twitter. Hi to all of you. I told you the guy's going to retire. And then I was wrong, or so I thought. But no, I was right, but in a way I never thought I would be right. That on February 4th, the day before signing day, Mark Dantonio would retire. Now, everyone's reading all sorts of nefarious intent into the situation. Tony Paul from the Detroit News had the story today. It dropped. It's sort of the second layer of a story he's already been working on about Curtis Blackwell, former Michigan State staffer, alleging NCAA violations by Mark Dantonio and his program while Blackwell was there, alleging that Dantonio perjured himself during his deposition by lying about certain recruiting violations and who was there and who was not there on certain visits. I understand the read into that. I really do. I understand why you can say, look, this story dropped at noon, and by 1:30, Dantonio announces that he's done. But it was too quick. It was too quick to be related. And the stories came out pretty quick from sources that we should trust. Not my sources, but Bob Wojnarowski, who is not known as a reporter, but if he tells you he heard something, he heard it. The story came out that Dantonio decided to retire about a week ago. Do I think the Blackwell stuff had something to do with it? Yes, I do. But that wasn't why. I don't think Dantonio's running for the hills, because if he were, he would be going to a beach in the Bahamas somewhere. He wouldn't be going just down the street to a cushy office job in East Lansing working for Michigan State, collecting that seven-figure salary in retirement, partial retirement. This isn't a guy running and hiding. I think this is a guy that is just burnt out, that thought he could restoke the flame one more time, and he just couldn't. That's what I think this is. And the timing is terrible. I think Mark Dantonio has spent the last 2 months trying to convince himself that he still had it, that he still had something to give, that he could rise up to the challenge one more time. He talked about his father always preaching that you have to finish your circles. You got to finish your circles. And his circle wasn't finished. I don't think Dantonio was lying to you. I think he was lying to himself at that time. So as much as we want to read into this some nefarious intent, I think he was kidding himself. I think he underestimated the extent to which his flame has been extinguished. And this is why we're here today. So, where am I at with Mark Dantonio? Legacy-wise, that's a complicated question. But I will say acutely that I'm not furious with him for screwing over the university, rather. I don't think the timing is good. I think the timing will hurt his legacy in part. But I don't think he's doing it just to collect the bonus. They would have paid him that bonus 2 weeks ago anyway, that $4.5 million bonus that everyone's talking about. There's this line going on around now that he sat back, waited to get the bonus, and then he skedaddled out of town. I don't think that's what happened. They were going to pay that bonus regardless. That bonus was for past accomplishments. That was a reward for loyalty to that university over the years when he had offers supposedly from Texas and other universities. He never even took these interviews, never even took these meetings. And he was under market for a few years there with Michigan State when his stock was high. I don't think there's any ill intent here. I just don't. And there's no way, I don't know. I could be wrong, but I don't think there's anyone that really does know except Mark Dantonio and maybe those closest to him. But I don't think he's demonstrated that he's that kind of guy, and I don't think that's where he was at. I think he intended to come back, and he just doesn't have it. He's gone. And when you're that intense of a personality, when you're that on edge all the time, and that's what got Dantonio going. That's partly why he was so successful. I think when you lose that just even a little bit, you can't do it anymore. You know, it's like a really good boxer. Once he gets knocked out, it's tough. He's never the same, right? You can lose a fight, but once you get knocked out, I think the last couple of years have knocked out Mark Dantonio. Not just the win and loss situation. The on-field product's obviously poor. But, you know, the depositions, the media controversies, whatever you think his guilt is or not in that, I think it's worn on him. And I think he's done, and I think that's what happened. And I think he realized it too late. But not too late for him, but too late for the program he's leaving behind. So that's a tough break for Michigan State. In terms of his legacy, again, complicated. So I think ultimately Mark Dantonio is going to be remembered fondly. So it's easy to, in the moment, look at the last couple of years where we are frustrated with the on-field product. It's easy to look at the controversy surrounding the program the last couple of years, really surrounding the whole university, some of which Dantonio was implicated in. It's easy to get tied up in that. But you have to try to kick yourself into the future a little bit. And what's his legacy going to be? We're talking legacy. We're not talking about what you think of him today. So when we sit back and look, what do you expect from a Michigan State football coach? What were our dream expectations before Dantonio got here in 2007? Well, if you're a Michigan State fan, you want to beat Michigan as much as possible. I mean, there's no set number, but as much as possible, you want to beat Michigan. If you can play them to 500 back then, that was great. That was a great success. You want to win the occasional Big Ten, and you want to go to the Rose Bowl. I mean, that's Michigan State football. And you can hate that the expectations are that low, or you may say that they're unreasonably high. I don't care what you think. That's kind of where Michigan State football has been, that the successful version of Michigan State football has been. It's not a national power and probably never will be. So you look at what Dantonio did. He went to the Rose Bowl. He won it. He won the Big Ten Conference 3 times. Came very close to winning it a 4th time. Lost right at the end to a great Russell Wilson Wisconsin team. He went to a college football playoff. Got smoked, but he got there. So he did exactly what you would hope the dream Michigan State coach would do. So you're not going to sit here and say, oh, Mark Dantonio has a failed legacy or a mediocre legacy. He was a resounding success on the whole. And anybody would have taken that success, that resume, if they had been offered it up front in a 13-year block back in 2007. If you tell me you're going to go 8-5 against Michigan, win the conference 3 times, finish in the top 6 in the AP poll 3 years in a row for a 3-year stretch, you take that. And you would probably think that the Lord above was being a little too generous in offering that. So his legacy's safe in terms of the on-field product. If it comes out that there's some controversy that Dantonio covered up that we don't know about, again, that's always open to interpretation and open and subject to change. But as things stand today, if the only thing Dantonio's guilty of covering up is whether Curtis Blackwell sat in the car or came in the house during a recruiting visit, I'm sorry. I mean, that is not a controversy that I think is up there with Joe Paterno and Jerry Sandusky. So it's just not. And I think if you try to equate Dantonio in these allegations with Blackwell as being some sort of corrupt figure, I think you're disingenuous at best. So that's where that's at. I think his legacy is safe. I think it's key too. His legacy is partly going to be framed by what comes next. So we'll get to the next coach here in a minute, but let's say that the next coach comes in next year, even if it's 2 years from now because they have an interim coach because of the situation Mark put him in. But let's say the next coach comes in and goes 6-6 and 5-7 and 5-7, and then he's gone. And it's just that repeat of the John L. Bobby Williams where, like, you're praying for 7-5 and to beat Michigan once out of every 4 years. I think Dantonio is going to be remembered even more fondly. And conversely, if someone comes in here and starts ripping off 10, 11-win seasons, Dantonio will still be secure as an important figure in Michigan State football, but I don't think he'll be held in the same regard. So, absence will make the heart grow fonder if things go south in East Lansing. If things go east or west or north, things get better or stay roughly the same, they'll like him. He'll always be appreciated, but it won't be to the same extent. So I think his legacy, even in retirement, is still being written because what comes next is going to matter quite a bit in how he's viewed and how that whole thing is framed. In terms of the negatives with Dantonio, we talked about the positives. I mean, loyal to a fault, obviously. We've beat that drum to death here for 2 years. The offensive staff being shuffled around. We said the last time it was like they were throwing the names in a jar and shaking it up like a game of Yahtzee and just rolling them on the table. And okay, offensive coordinator, you go here, you go here. It was a disaster of an offseason, the last two really. So he was loyal to a fault without question. He was stubborn to a fault, playing trestle ball, whether or not it made sense in the situation. Was way too conservative in spots where they could have gone for the jugular. We saw that happen a few times, but at the same time, he also went for the jugular quite a bit, and he was known for that as well. So, he wasn't perfect, certainly wasn't a deity, drove me nuts the last couple years, but won a lot of big games and did well. And again, you got to remember, this is Michigan State. I mean, it's my alma mater. I love them. It's Michigan State, okay? This is not traditional USC. This is not Ohio State. This is certainly not Clemson of the last few years, or certainly not Alabama. So given that it's Michigan State, I think he did fine. So that's where we're at with Mark Dantonio. I want to hit on this a little bit, and I don't want to spend too much time on this. Anyone that has spent even a minute on social media, like the last 8 hours, if you're watching this later, the day that Mark Dantonio stepped down, it is a field day for the stupidest segment of the Michigan fan base, where they are stomping on Mark Dantonio's figurative grave. They're mocking the guy. They're saying that he's taking his ball and running, that pride did in fact come before the fall, and all this stuff. And it's, I got to tell you, the guy went 8-5 against you. And that's the bottom line. And he will retire with that 8-5 mark. And now you can't touch it. So if I were you, not only due to your recent success, but due to the last 13 years, I probably would be sad that Dantonio left, because you seem to have taken back control of the rivalry, and maybe you could have evened out that 8-5 ledger. But you can mock them all you want. You can say what you want, but I'll tell you, sports is a scoreboard game. It is a scoreboard game. We are about the scoreboard in sports. And when you check the scoreboard, let's go right down the list. 8-5 against you. 3 Big Ten titles to your 0. This is all since 2007 when he arrived. 3 Big Ten titles to 0. 3 trips to Indy to 0. 2 wins over Urban Meyer to 0. And 1 trip to the college football playoff to 0. Sports are about the scoreboard. Michigan lost the scoreboard to this guy on the field and as a program for the majority of his time there. So say what you want about Mark Dantonio. If I were you, I'd probably be happy he's gone for a different reason, not because it would be an opportunity to mock the guy, but because he did a number on you for a long time, and God forbid Dantonio sticks around and gets this thing going again. That would be your worst nightmare. So, the majority of Michigan fans that I know, Chris Castellani, my friend Jack, Michigan alum, they get it. They get that Dantonio was a success there, and had a great run there for a Michigan State coach. But take it easy with the celebration in the Mardi Gras in Ann Arbor. You guys got your own problems, and Dantonio did just fine against you, so I don't think he has anything to apologize for, and certainly nothing to be embarrassed about as it relates to anything that happened in that rivalry in the last 13 years. I think he can be pretty happy with the result of that. So that's Mark Dantonio. As far as the next coach, everyone's talking about Luke Fickell. The reports are out there that Luke Fickell is the favorite to replace Mark Dantonio. Cincinnati coach, defensive-minded, got that Midwest thing, good recruiter, had a couple 11-win seasons in Cincinnati. It seems kind of like the obvious, easy move. That's fine. Looking down the list of who they're talking about, Mike Tressel's in there temporarily now. Pat Narduzzi, obviously, the Pittsburgh head coach, former defensive coordinator. I get it. Got the ties. Had a lot of success here as a defensive coordinator. But, again, kind of a blah hire. I think Fickell would be better than Narduzzi, but those are the first two names. I'll tell you, I haven't seen anyone mention this guy. I pulled him up. Tony Elliott, Clemson's co-offensive coordinator, 40 years old, co-architect of one of the best offenses in the country the last few years. Relatable guy, played not that long ago, again, just 40 years old, young and up and coming, and a guy that you might actually have a chance to get if you pay him enough. Tony Elliott is not getting any major offers. He's still a little green as a coordinator to get the offers from the schools you'd really be afraid of, like Florida State coming for him or something like that. Tony Elliott, I think, is the way I would go. He won the Broyles Award in 2017, best assistant in college football. I think that's a guy that is offensive-minded, that would get the juices flowing a little bit in East Lansing. I don't think Pat Narduzzi or Luke Fickell move the needle at all. I think they're going to come in, if they come in, and have a lot of 7 and 8 win seasons and, pop Michigan once in a while, and they can restore the program to a little better than they're at right now, where you kind of peak at 9 wins. But Tony Elliott, unproven guy, who knows if he's going to make it as a head coach? Plenty of coordinators have failed. But I think it's an interesting resume. It's an interesting background. And that's a guy, if I'm Bill Beekman, I'm in East Lansing, I'm calling him. I'm calling to get permission to speak to him, and I'm going to make him a big offer because that's what this program needs. I don't think it needs another defensive-minded, close to the vest, trestle ball, 7-8 win type coach. I don't think that's in the cards. So that's that. I got my vote down for Tony Elliott. Michigan State, this is an interesting time. This is a terrible time to hire a coach. So they might have to punt the year and just roll it to next year and see and just go with Mike Tressel for a year. It's not ideal, but that's where they're at. So we'll hit Michigan State basketball really quick. I mean, this is a mess. Again, another day, another loss. Penn State just dropped the game to Penn State at home. Tom Izzo's been almost automatic at home after a loss in his career, particularly after conference losses. Not tonight, didn't have it. Cassius Winston was the only one with a pulse tonight. The bottom line is Cassius Winston does not have enough help. He still does not have enough help. Tonight he was the only scorer in double figures. And you look at this box score. First of all, if you watch the game, the last 5 minutes of that game tonight against Penn State, nobody wanted the ball. It was the most pitiful game of hot potato I've ever seen. Winston was doubled the second he touched the ball on every possession down the stretch. And, of course, he did the smart thing and passed it off. And they couldn't wait, whether it was Aaron Hendry and Malik Hall, they couldn't wait to get rid of the ball. They wanted nothing to do with the ball late. It reminded me of the Chris Webber Sacramento King days where he was one of the best 3 players in the world, but just couldn't take the shot in crunch time. No one wanted the ball. And that's going to be a problem. Say what you want about Matt McQuaid and Kenny Goins, but they didn't have a problem taking the shot. Might not always make it. They made a few big ones. But they definitely had no problem taking it by the end. McQuaid did early in his career, but not at the end. And that's where we're at this year. And you can't have just one guy willing to shoot late. Even Xavier Tillman passed up an open 3 down the stretch. And he's competent at those. It's a problem. And you look at the box score from tonight. If you take Cassius Winston out, take him off the box score, the team shot above 50% from the field in a game where they couldn't score in the last 5-6 minutes. the problem is not that the teammates aren't shooting well. The problem is they're not shooting the ball at all. Look at this. Xavier Tillman, 5 attempts. Malik Hall, 4 attempts. Gabe Brown, 4 attempts. Played the whole game. You got to take more than 4 shots when you're open and you're starting and playing the majority of the game. It's not like Penn State is some elite defensive team and you're at home. I'm sorry. This is not a team that, they couldn't buy a bucket tonight. This is a team that did not want to shoot the ball unless they were wearing the number 5. And that's not going to work. And I'll tell you, this team feels like it's one player away from being really, really good, from a team that you could feel good about going into March and winning perhaps the whole thing. And that player could have come in the form of a healthy Josh Langford. It could have come in the form of an eligibility wavered Joey Hauser. It could have come in the form of Nick Ward not leaving early. It could have come in the form of Vernon Carey not going to Duke and coming to Michigan State instead. I mean, it didn't even matter who. Big guy, small guy, whatever. This team just feels like it was one player away, one viable, gutsy player away willing to shoot from being where they want to be. And that doesn't mean it cannot happen. We saw Aaron Henry pull it out of his ass last year in the tournament. No one saw that coming. The guy was playing out of his mind. We saw Gabe Brown do it for a game last year in the tournament. We saw Goran Sutan, jersey right behind me, game worn in the Michigan game in 2009. We saw Goran Sutan do it throughout the NCAA tournament in 2009. He was the only one that showed up against UNC. Check that box score in the title game in Detroit. Everyone was terrible but Sutan. Came out of relatively nowhere. So it can happen. And I don't know who it's going to be. It might be Henry again. It might be Gabe Brown. It might be Rocket Watts. We've seen flashes of it. But it's got to happen or this whole Michigan State thing's not going to happen. And this team could lose in the second or third game. I mean, that's where you're at because teams are going to take Winston away. And I know Winston missed a free throw to tie it. I know he missed a very good look to tie it again at the end. But this loss is not on him. Nobody wanted to shoot the ball, and it's a problem. And, there's no trade deadline. This is college. Someone's got to do it that's already on the team. And let's tie the topics together. I don't know if you guys saw Mark Dantonio's speech at halftime. They announced on the Big Ten Network Mark Dantonio plans to speak to the crowd, the packed crowd at the Breslin Center to address his career and retirement. The guy was on the floor about as long as Steven Izzo is when he shows up. I mean, it was like 12 seconds and he was gone. This whole thing is bizarre. I mean, it's the whole thing. The guy announces his retirement. He's the most legendary coach in the history of the school, modern history of the school. He announces it in a tweet out of nowhere. No one in the program even knew it was coming. It's told that he's going to address the crowd, this adoring crowd at the Breslin Center, giving him a standing ovation. And by the time he says hello, the speech is half over. I mean, this whole thing is bizarre. East Lansing's a crazy place. I don't know what to make of that. I'll tell you what, this team does miss Nick Ward. This team misses Nick Ward. Everybody shit on Nick Ward, but me, because Nick Ward was my guy, number 44 last year, the big fella. That was my guy. Everyone shit on him saying, who needs him? He's going to be a pouty senior. It's probably better that he's leaving early. We don't need him pouting on the bench as a sixth man. Nick Ward was the quintessential team is on a cold streak, can't buy a bucket, can't make nothing, dump it in the 44 for a couple quick buckets, 4 to 6 points. He was unguardable one-on-one. He was finally at the end of his career getting semi-competent at kicking it out when he was doubled. Not saying he was great at it, but he was getting better. But Nick Ward is the guy you need in a game like tonight where no one wanted to shoot the ball, no one wanted anything to do with the ball. Nick Ward would have planted his fat ass in the post, would have put his arm up, taken the ball, flipped it in, then he would have gone down, gotten a stop, gotten a rebound, and come back down and done it again. And he would have busted up that whole cold stretch. That's what he did. He had plenty of flaws, but when you couldn't get a bucket and no one wanted the ball, the big fella wanted the ball, this team misses Nick Ward, and I think a lot of the fans are biting their tongues now. But there was a lot of shit said about Nick Ward at the time, and y'all look silly now, I'll tell you that, because Nick Ward would be huge for this team right now. So that's it for Michigan State basketball. Next game coming up this Saturday against Michigan in Ann Arbor. I'll tell you what, you want to talk about a mess. I think Michigan State basketball is frustrating, and I'm mad about 8-4 in the conference. Michigan moved to 4-7 with the home loss to Ohio State today, a flailing Ohio State team. Michigan basketball is a mess. That team started 7-0. What are they now? Like 6-9 since, something like that. 6-10, something like that. Their wins, a couple of them are against teams like in D3, D2. I mean, it's a mess in Ann Arbor right now. They've had some injuries, but you're not going to hear any tears for you in East Lansing with Joshua Langford, and Kyle Arns has the back of an 87-year-old grandma. So not getting any sympathy here, I'll tell you that. And I don't feel good if I'm a Michigan fan about Saturday, because the stakes are high for both teams. Michigan State losing 3 in a row is tough to fathom. They did do it last year, in a year they went to the Final Four. Not saying it can't happen, but I think Michigan's in trouble on Saturday. I think it'll be a little closer, but I see, I don't know, let's call it 74-62 Sparty. Michigan, at this point, you have to wonder if they're going to make the tournament at all. The announcers, I don't know who it was on ESPN at the end of that Ohio State-Michigan game tonight, were saying, despite that 4-7, whatever it was, conference record, Michigan is safely in the tournament as of now. And, I get the Big Ten's competitive, and I get that it's a weird field this year. I don't know how anyone with Michigan's profile is safely in at this point, especially when you can pretty much count on Saturday as a loss as far as I'm concerned. I think that program for this year is in trouble. Juwan Howard is recruiting his ass off. We'll probably be fine. But for this year, I think they're in trouble. So that's where we're at. I think Sparty takes them down on Saturday, but someone has got to step up in East Lansing other than Cassius Winston. We've been waiting for Aaron Henry for 3 months. It might be time for someone else to step up. I appreciate that Rocket Watts has a good game here or there, but we need a sustained run of 3, 4, 5 games in a row of somebody doing something. Tillman actually did it for a couple weeks. Hasn't done it really since. So we're waiting, guys, because Cassius Winston, you talk about that missed free throw at the end, that missed 3 at the end that he missed badly to tie. That looks like a guy that has a program on his back and is just exhausted. So feel free to help him out. We'll talk a little bit more. I plan to hop on this weekend after hopefully a Michigan State win, but I'll tell you, bad times in East Lansing. Mark Dantonio is gone. The whole program is caught holding the bag. Michigan State basketball will probably be fine, but have seen better weeks, to say the least. So we'll see, but appreciate you joining us. We'll see you again in, a few days, maybe even before Saturday, because I'll tell you, the Pistons are either going to make me very happy or drive me completely insane. Derrick Rose is still here. Luke Kennard is still here. And Andre Drummond is still here. I am praying that I just dated this show, because when I go to bed tonight, it's going to turn out that they're all gone. But if the Pistons make it the next couple days without making major clear the decks moves, we'll definitely, absolutely see you before Saturday. This has been the Spiro Avenue podcast, the Spiro Avenue TV show, the Spiro Avenue Hour, whatever you want to call it. Justin Spiro, Spiro Avenue, thank you for listening. Love you guys. Have a good night.